as we're kind of hitting the 7 o'clock mark, I think we'll kind of get started now. So welcome everybody. Thank you to our panelists and thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to say first and foremost, welcome to the C.A.S.T 2020 Community Awareness Night. It's our first one. Very excited to kickstart it during Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Before I do an introduction of our panelists, I'll do a quick introduction of myself, C.A.S.T, and give an outline of the evening this evening. My name is Ashley Moore. I'm the Interim Executive Director for C.A.S.T, Citizens Against Sex Trafficking. We're located in the East Metro of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And our mission at C.A.S.T is to empower our community to end sexual exploitation. We do that through prevention in the forms of education, awareness, collaboration. And so one way we do that is through these events like this evening, our community awareness nights, really bringing in incredible speakers to come and share their wealth of knowledge, experience, expertise with the community, bridging that for people so that we can have a good understanding of what's taking place in our backyard. And so that's what we're going to be discussing tonight is what is happening in our backyard. What does exploitation, what does trafficking look like here? What is the problem? Because when we understand the problem, we can start working towards that solution. So that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight. So I will give an introduction to our panelists. We have a set of questions and a few household items too. At the bottom of your screen, we'll have time potentially for Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on that. So on the bottom of your screen, if you do have a question that pops up as one of our speakers are talking, feel free to click on that and type in a question you have. And at the end of the night, we'll go towards that. If you have any comments, feel free to add that to our chat and we can kind of go from there. So if anybody has questions, feel free to pop it up. I'll be watching throughout the time this evening here. And so to kind of kickstart, I'll do an introduction of our incredible speakers. I will start with Terri Forliti, the Executive Director of Breaking Free. So in addition to being a survivor of many forms of sexual exploitation or sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, Terri focused on empowerment of the marginalized while obtaining her degree in organizational leadership from Bethel University in 2005. Terri served on the board of directors for Breaking Free and was eventually hired as a staff member due to her incredible gift of relating with the women and girls they served and her tireless dedication to them. Prior to being in the executive director role at Breaking Free, Terri built their database system, which now gives them the ability for concrete analysis, trends, and statistics of victims of sexual abuse, and helps track their victim services. Terri is a member of the Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force, official Super Bowl committee, ERA delegate, heading home Ramsey County and crime-free multi-housing groups, abolitionist campaign, served on the board of Aurora St. Anthony Neighborhood Development Organization and the board of St. Paul Coalition of Churches. And in January 2015, Terri was awarded the Lois M. Christensen Award, Women Who Impact, by the Minnesota Women of Today. And in 2019, Terri was awarded the Alumni of the Year from Bethel University. So Terri, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And then we have Ryan Stewart, the Sergeant of Oakdale Police Department. He has served as a police officer for the city of Oakdale since 2006, where he served as a detective before being promoted to police sergeant in 2020 due to his outstanding dedication and service to the community. Prior to his promotion, Ryan served on the East Metro Sex Trafficking Task Force for 5 years. There, he investigated sex trafficking and trafficking-related cases throughout Washington County, linked to operations both at the local and international level. His work has led to the arrest and convictions of sex traffickers, as well as the assistance and support for victims and survivors. So thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us this evening as well. And finally, we have Imran Ali, the Assistant District Attorney for Washington County. Imran Ali is Washington County's lead human trafficking prosecutor for East Metro Human Trafficking Task Force. Imran has prosecuted several cases involving large, organized domestic and international human trafficking operations. I can't see if somebody has on the mute there. And keep going. Sorry about that, Imran. Right. So dealing with both domestic and international human trafficking operations, he has helped achieve convictions for dozens of child sex predators and sex traffickers while working on cases helping hundreds of victims. For his work in human trafficking, Imran has received several awards, including the 2016 Minnesota Attorney of the Year, 2017 Department of Public Safety Award, the 2019 Minnesota Country Attorneys Association's Notorious Service Award, and the 2020 Minnesota Attorney of the Year. He currently serves as a human trafficking expert for the National District Attorneys Association. And in 2021, Imran was appointed to serve on the international delegation of experts to several African countries who have recently seen a rise in human trafficking and provide assistance as they tackle growing the public health crisis there. So thank you so much, Imran, for joining us as well. We are thrilled to have all three of you join us this evening. So we're going to be focusing on what is the problem going on for trafficking here. And so the first question is to really kind of lay the foundation. So often I've been asked, like, oh, this is an issue that's happening over there, whether it's just an urban issue or an issue happening in another country. So the first question I have for you all is human trafficking and sexual exploitation taking place in our community? And if so, what does it look like? And I'll let anybody who wants to jump in kind of tackle that question first.
Yeah, it happens everywhere in the world, anywhere where there are male and females. This is a human right violation. If it's the most basic way of power and control that exists and has existed since the beginning of time. If somebody can take advantage of another human being sexually in exchange for something of value, it's going to happen. It's going to happen in the most remote places of the world. It's going to happen in big cities. It doesn't matter where it is. It's going to happen everywhere, and it's always happened. I don't know, Imran, what do you think?
I mean, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, I think as we evolve and as we have evolved over the years, I think we're starting to put some commonalities together. We've oftentimes looked at prostitution as being just in a silo. And I think now understanding just the implications of prostitution and how it is a public health issue and how there's a lot more, I think trauma and harm and all of that that goes with it. We're starting to understand that trafficking component, I think, more. I mean, if you said 10 years ago, what's a pimp? I mean, I would say I know what a pimp is. 20 years ago, I'd say I know what a pimp is. But I think now we're starting to have a better idea exactly of what that is, who that is, what they look like, and where they're at.
And what dynamics they use, what power and control dynamics they use to get us, I'm a survivor, you'd mentioned that before, to get us into the life. And I think too, what's important, just to piggyback off that, is that many times, many of us don't even realize that we're involved in prostitution. I never wore fishnet stockings. I never flirted with anyone. I never wore stilettos or placed an ad, but that doesn't mean I wasn't in and out of cars. And that didn't mean that I didn't have to come up with a quota every day to bring a man who was my pimp. Like Imran says, I thought a pimp was someone like Huggy Bear that just sold women and lived in a stable and had all these other women. That's not what it looks like anymore. It could be a woman, it could be a man, it could be the mother of somebody. It comes in all shapes and sizes. This is pure exploitation. And it comes at any age. And I think that's another thing we're realizing, what the vulnerabilities are. Many of us in the life, and maybe Ryan, you could talk about this too, is that we had some congenital anomalies before we even got into this. We were depressed. We were maybe fetal alcohol syndrome. Maybe we were autistic, but many of us had vulnerabilities before we entered the life. And we know that that's part of the dynamics of power and control, is to find somebody who has a lower self-esteem, a vulnerability, and an unmet need. And they come along with their false promise. And that's how a lot of times this happens. Is that what you see as well?
Yeah, you guys touched on a lot of good points there, and how it kind of evolved, obviously, with technology changing over the years has been a big change for us. Also, what you're saying about people that have already been exploited in their youth, that maybe molested or something along those lines, that they exploit that in the future, where they make them feel not worth anything, and then kind of use that to keep them in the game. So very good points you guys made.
So kind of touching a little bit based on what you guys are talking about for some of those vulnerabilities. I know I have a few parents that have asked me, like, are there certain do's and don'ts? Are there certain risk factors that as a parent I need to be aware of to protect my kid, especially if, you know, in the age of technology, traffickers are starting to target online more?
I think Imran can really answer the online stuff better than I can.
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, the one way that a parent can protect them is to actually know what their kids are doing. You know, I mean, a lot of these cases that Ryan and I have worked on for the last 5 years, they started at home, and it started online, and it started on a cell phone, and it started, you know, with zero regulation to that cell phone. And I remember we talked with a victim's mom, and this was her third child, last child that she had, that, you know, that was being exploited and trafficked. And she said if she could change one thing from parenting, it was that she would not allow her child to have that cell phone.
He might
Did we
have
lose
froze.
you?
Oh, did he lose?
I think you froze.
Imran,
Yeah, just piggybacking off what he's saying there, people kind of get into these pigeonholes of what they think is where the problem is happening, but it's really any application, whether it be an Xbox game where you can communicate, anything where you can have one-on-one communication or group communication with a juvenile or an adult. We see the exploitation happening. It doesn't have to be just like Snapchat or Facebook. It could be all these, like, we've seen it start on like Find
Twitter.
Friends, or that type of, like, where you play games and you go back and forth and you randomly get matched with other people. They just figure out who they're talking to and learn how they can exploit that person and see if they have vulnerabilities that they can use for their benefit in the future. So that's the biggest thing we like to get out there is, like Imran said, you have to be in the know on what's going on if you do give your child a device that can communicate with strangers out there. So
absolutely.
And I have an 18-year-old now, and one of the things that she's very well aware of trafficking techniques.
that's weird. I would never
She's been
imagine.
around me for a long time. Yeah, I know. She was never allowed to sleep over in anyone's house, not ever. She could have people at our house, but not there. So one of the things I'm seeing with some of her friends, and being that I was in the life for so many years, I went through a lot of different treatment centers, and I failed or succeeded, doesn't matter. But I met a lot of people and their families in these places. And over the years, many of those people have failed, and I have assumed foster care responsibilities for a lot of these kids. And what I'm seeing is this is something that's kind of common, and Ryan and Imran know about this too, is that a good chunk of our youth smoke a lot of weed and do a lot of other things too, opiates, you know, mollies, things like that. Now, I don't see as many of them doing the cocaine and the well, meth. Some of that stuff's big, but anyways, it's common for people to call and say, let's meet up and match. Okay. So what that means is, when you say let's call and meet up to match, that means you just want to smoke a blunt with someone, you know, no big deal. But the problem is, I'm asking these kids, first of all, do you know this person you're going to meet with? You know, and the other thing, I don't want to say it's no big deal, because it can be a big deal. A lot of times, weed dealers are the ones that are getting killed. They're the ones that aren't carrying the guns, and people want to rob them. They want to rob them for their product, for their money, for whatever. So I don't mean that. I just mean that I'm glad they're not going to a big opium den or a big place where they're shooting a lot of heroin. But even something as little as smoking a joint with a friend or a blunt with a friend is very dangerous. And it's very common. And so you talk about matching and you got to go meet somewhere. You don't know what you're going to find there. And then the other thing is you don't know what that could be laced with. You know, so I think that's something that I've seen. I've had to pick up teens several different occasions that were completely out of it. I've had to literally pick them up and bring them into my car because they've been drugged in one way or another. And the Xanax and the combination of a lot of those kinds of things that they're using, I think that makes our kids, our youth, and very vulnerable.
So I'm hearing too that it can be oftentimes more targeted towards youth. It doesn't really discriminate. Like it could be through different technology outlets. It could be through socialization. Are there other demographics or risk factors, things that the community should be aware of when keeping an eye out for, hey, this could be potentially an exploitive situation? Are there certain signs that community members should be keeping that eye out for?
Are we talking Washington County or Minneapolis, St. Paul? I mean, I think there's some different things we can do in the suburbs versus the city.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we start with the suburbs and then mention some of the things in the city too?
So generally, I mean, one thing we tell people a lot is obviously if there's new gifts that are showing up, a new phone or stuff that they don't have money to purchase is a good sign. Obviously, if they start becoming distant, you start noticing drug use. They're gone for several days. Maybe become a runaway frequently, and then they come back and then they go again, that type of thing. Just appearance changes that are drastic. There's a whole list of, I can go on and on. I don't have them all off the top of my head, but I'm sure Imran does. He's got a really good memory.
Actually, I don't. Can everybody hear me and see me?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. I apologize. As a government
Now
servant,
we can.
as a government servant, I don't have the best internet at home. But it's one of those sacrifices that I make. So I may go in and out over a period of time.
Same with nonprofit.
Yeah. But I mean, I think what Ryan said, I mean, people ask that question. We can have a list of them, but really, for community members, if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And so it's okay, to call somebody or even ask a friend if it's not an emergency and say, hey, what do you think about this? And if somebody else says it, there's so many rumors that are going on online right now about, if you see this or if you see that, and all of that's fake. That's been going on for the last year. But it's really like, inside of you, if you think about it, if you see something wrong, say something.
And who should we say something to?
Ryan.
Typically not Sergeant Stewart at Oakdale Police Department. No, you can report it locally if you think it's happening or occurring locally. Kind of touching base on a little bit back on this conversation, but is the best safety net for me is just having a good network of friends where you can have, or friends and family that are trusted that can all work together to keep the eye on the juveniles. I always talk about juveniles because that's mostly when people get into this. Obviously, there's a lot of adult victims that get into it after they're 18, but the majority of people we're working with start at under 18 and then continue on after that. Just to keep that network, to keep an eye out for them, and any changes are easier to see when there's multiple people that the person trusts and can communicate with and kind of pick up on these little things. But yes, you'd report it locally. If you don't know where it's occurring, you can start at your local police department. Otherwise, the task force in the state have tip lines that you can contact to make that report. I think Imran will be able to give you the number here. I don't have it anymore, but
otherwise we'll have.
I'll actually defer to. Well, when I defer to Terri too, we can talk about day one a little bit and just kind of because we made a lot of inroads, 5, 6, 7 years ago. If you'd call like an advocacy group or some sort of shelter, you wouldn't really have that play with law enforcement and those connections. But we've really worked well together to kind of build up trust with each other. And so, Terri, if you want to talk about that, kind of what to do for the community.
Yeah, and I would prefer, we get calls from grandmothers and mothers, some of whom Imran has worked with and maybe Ryan in the past. But if it's the first call for help, I would prefer that it go through law enforcement, because we don't want to get really involved in other kinds of issues. We can, being a survivor-led organization, we can help get that person to where they need to be to meet their service needs, to create a safety plan, to get them into a shelter, to get them in permanent supportive housing, to get their mental health needs met, their medical needs met, all that. But if there's something else involved that could be violent, you know, like if you see something, say something, I just say call law enforcement first on that. I really do. And then we'll work with law enforcement, or call day one. But we'll be happy to work with law enforcement from there. So if somebody calls us and says, we've got this case, we're on it. We are on it, and we will go get that individual. We'll work with that individual. We'll help them with their needs. But one of the things I do want to bring up, though, in the community, something that you could be looking at, because this is pretty common, and this is really relevant, is if you see somebody with another person and that other person isn't making eye contact, that they're looking down, or that the person who's speaking for them won't allow them to talk, that's usually an indication. Because I want to tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I had a baby with my abuser, with my pimp. So he's still into my life. He's not pimping anymore, but there's still some times where I have to be around him and his old pimp friends. Well, they came over a couple weeks ago because we had a death in the family, and my God, it's been 20 years and they're in my house. They know I run Breaking Free, but yet they would not allow me to talk. Still to this day, I couldn't look them in the eyes, and they were not going to respond to me. I can only respond if they allow me to respond. That's the old school pimping, and there's still a lot of old school pimps out there. So to this day, I can't be around those people. I have to treat them the same way, or something could pop off the wrong way. I better only know, while we're working, we better only know the color of the shoes, and from the knees down, we better not even be able to identify anyone, because that's part of the power and control. So if someone's talking for you, and if you're not allowed to look at them, that to me would be a time to call Ryan, because something's going on, you know, unless there was a severe mental illness or something like that. But when someone is actually controlling you to that level, and they do, I would question that.
Yeah, and I agree. Law enforcement should be the first contact, whether it be one of the tip lines that go straight to law enforcement. Just for the main reason is that you may be reporting and thinking it's sex trafficking, but it could turn out to be some type of other exploitation that would kind of get lost in the shuffle. Kind of going back 5 years ago when Imran and I started working together, Imran did most of the community training and law enforcement training. But just the amount of training that law enforcement has had on this topic at the street level has been a great asset to build, because of the fact in the past when this would get reported, they kind of fall through the cracks, because they'd be like, I don't know how to deal with this, whatever it is. But now there's so much training that's been done that a street officer can take that report and pass that up the chain to the right organization that can investigate it thoroughly and make stuff happen instead of it just getting lost, which is a great asset to have.
Well, yeah, and to piggyback on that, Ryan, some of the training that you and Imran have been giving, providing other people, and that you've received and that we've received, is not stuff that we normally would know. We wouldn't know off the top of our head. Like, we wouldn't know about reckless eyeballing. We wouldn't know about, God, I just had something off the tip of my head. But again, I do want to point out that what Ryan said is that this is a violent, very violent industry. And very often I had guns to my head. I was beat up severely. Several of our women right now have plates in their head, or they have what's called, what is that? Permanent brain injury?
Traumatic brain
PBIs.
injury.
Traumatic
Yeah,
brain injury.
that. Yeah, traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, that's what it is. And, they can barely function. So just about everyone out there that's in this heinous thing of sex trafficking, they're also involved in drug dealing and other crimes. So we know that maybe if you get picked up for check writing or fraud or something like that, it might be connected with sex trafficking. We know labor trafficking and sex trafficking is often very much intersectionalities. Oh, and then this is what I was thinking of before. So maybe Imran and Ryan find somebody that's higher than a kite. So they know not to talk to them that day, but maybe the next day they don't make a lot of sense either. They might go from A, B, C, D as they're telling their story, and the next day it's C, B, A, D. Well, they know that they're not necessarily lying. They're knowing that we dissociate. We don't want to remember what the hell happened. I wanted to be high when I turned tricks. I didn't want to be sober. So when you ask me something, I'll remember to the best of my ability. But the girl that taught me to look at the lights when I'm having sex with somebody and get out of that space that you're in, I did that. I took that to heart. And from my very first trick, I focused on something else. I didn't want to know what was going on in that room. Unfortunately, sometimes I remembered, but sometimes I didn't so well. So that's part of the trauma. And that's part of the, so to get information out of folks, to know how to interview them, to help keep them safe, to understand these dynamics. And I think law enforcement is doing a terrific job with that. They understand so much more than other stakeholders in this business.
I know I was a caseworker for several years, and I had several clients who they would never be able to tell exactly from A to B what happened in one, chronological order because of the trauma. And so I think that's oftentimes people have this perception that, a victim is going to be able to articulate what happened, or that they're going to be able to even want to talk about it or accept that or identify as a victim. So when you're engaging as a community member, somebody connecting with someone you think might be in a trafficking situation, both in the city and in suburbia and in rural communities, are there certain things like you see someone, should you engage with them? Should you not engage with them? What should you do as a community member if you think you're potentially connecting with someone who might be in a vulnerable situation like that?
For me, it depends on what your relationship is. If it's just a random encounter with a person, I would probably not engage directly with that person. I would just call and make a report about it. If you think it's something that's urgent at that time where they're in danger, I would just call 911 and report that so that you can have the authorities make contact. Just because, like Terri and Imran both have said, it's a dangerous thing. You can start interacting with them and take away something that somebody else is looking to make money off of. They're going to be irrational about what you're doing, and I wouldn't get involved on a personal level. Imran and Terri can add to that, but that's just my personal take on it.
I got nothing to add. I think that's spot on.
Okay.
Exactly. Because I'll tell you what's going to happen to that girl or boy or whatever, whoever happens to be the victim. They're going to get beat to shit. I'm sorry, they're going to get beat up. They're going to get beat up, right? If they get back with their abuser. So, but you know what? In those situations, like Ryan said, maybe call, if you call and it looks like it's a pretty bad situation, go park somewhere else where they can't see you, and then just make sure that you stay there until law enforcement shows up. But don't get out of your car. Don't do anything. Don't intervene.
Yeah, so Terri, you probably can talk about this, but the number of encounters with law enforcement before a victim typically makes a report is pretty high. It's not on the first one. So say you call on this, they're in a parking lot somewhere and you think something shady is going on, that trafficking may be involved. You make a call, the cops show up, they at least ID the two people. They know to separate them. They give the chance for the victim to come forward and they can work on what they got. But at a bare minimum, that those two people are linked together now. So down the road, you get a second, third chance at talking to the victim, and it's very helpful for prosecution purposes to put the person in jail. So it's a good point.
Is it also oftentimes, are you seeing that the trafficker, like we're talking about, if you're coming across a stranger as a potential victim, what if it's an acquaintance, a classmate, or somebody at, your local community group, religious house, whatever that might be? If you're acquainted with that person, is there a difference of what you should do?
Yeah, that's what I was kind of hinting at. I mean, if I had a personal relationship with someone, I'd obviously interact with them and try and get more details and see if I can make them safe, and try and get more details so that you can help kind of give that information to law enforcement so that they know that, hey, we're on your side here. We're trying to do the right thing and get you help. And what's happening to you is not normal. This is not normal behavior for someone to treat you like this and have you do things like that. So I would give a little more communication on that, but as far as the public stuff, I would not get involved in that.
Or ask your friend, is there anything going on in your life right now that you would like to see change? Do you feel safe? Keep it real general, because people aren't gonna, and Imran and Ryan know this too, people aren't gonna, if you ask them, have you been sex trafficked? They're gonna say, what does that mean? Or have you been involved in prostitution? Hell no. We don't want labels, for one thing. And when you're in the life, we're just in the life, period. That just means we have a lot of sex with people. We're going to get raped. We have to do crimes. We're going to go to jail, whatever. It's just survival. You do what you have to do to survive. So, yeah, they might not even know, but I agree. The first couple times you're going to be really scared and you're not going to want to turn your abuser in. But after you've been in, as long as I was, and a lot of my folks and clients, no, we want them turned in. We want them off the streets. We want to end this cycle of abuse.
Yeah, even people that have been in the game for a long time, they're still reluctant because they either feel that they're in love or they're worried about the beatdown that's going to come if the person doesn't go to jail and they're not protected. They got a lot of, or their drug habit, that they're the supplier and they don't want to have to quit cold turkey. There's so many variables that they are worried about that you're just trying to weed through and show them that you're going to do everything you can to keep them safe and kind of move forward from there.
And we have kids with them.
Yeah.
That's one of the big power and control tactics too, is they will pop holes in the condoms and we will get pregnant with their kids. Who wants? Well, many of us don't want to have kids with pimps, or tricks either, but it happens. It happens. And that's another whole huge power and control thing.
As a community, are there certain things that we're doing that are perpetuating this problem? And if so, what are they?
As a community, and I'm going to be sexist at this point, but as males purchasing sex, obviously we're perpetuating the supply and demand cycle. If there was no demand, there would be no supply. I'm a big believer in that, educating people about the fact that they're not two willing participants, which a lot of males we talk to when we're doing our John stings come in and they believe, hey, I'm just a guy, she's a girl, we're making a deal. Why can't we make this deal? She's willing to sell it and I'm willing to buy it. But they don't realize that the victims aren't willing participants. They're a pawn in this game. And it's if you can educate people before they make this decision, I think it's beneficial. One thing we've been doing for the last probably 3 years is doing the educating. It's like an hour class we do for all 8th grade students in the Washington County South District. And the reactions we get from people on that, they're old enough, they're going through sex education at that time. And that's the prime target age for getting into trafficking. So I believe that education, so you're educating people on what to look for from their friends being victims, but then you're also talking to the males and the potential buyers of future victims and kind of saying, hey, these people can't be bought. They're not doing this willingly, and just going through all the details of the trauma that goes through a victim's life. I think that's a huge, huge play. And that's where these types of group like C.A.S.T is beneficial to educate potential buyers, because potential buyers are your neighbors. They're not some weird guy that is locked up in his house that no one talks to. It's a a white male that has kids and family and a great job. And I mean, there's all different races that buy, but I mean, it's everybody. It's crazy when these people start coming in the door. You're like, that guy looks like my neighbor, you know, it's odd.
And I think the one thing that I've seen, especially in the last 2 years, is social media. Sex trafficking, it's been 5 years ago. It was a hot button topic. It still is. But as a result of that, what I've seen in the last year and a half or so is all of these posts that are false. They're the QAnon and Save the Children, and I read through those posts that are all over social media. Somebody kidnapped in La Crosse, or somebody kidnapped here, or if you have a zip tie on your windshield wiper, it's a sign of a trafficker. And it was all this Save the Children. So the intention is really good. It's bringing awareness, around the issue. The problem is that if it's not true, all it's doing is hurting our movement and what we've done. And I can't tell you, I mean, even this week, I saw things that are posted, from people that I know that are online. And so I think as community members, before you post something or share something, I know it's really difficult in the social media age, like look it up. PolarisProject.org. It's a fantastic website that has so much information about everything we've really talked about today, but a lot of those myths and realities of what you see. So do a little bit of research before you share something, thinking about something.
Yeah, what Imran's saying is basically how we ended up where we were 5 years ago. Everybody thought human trafficking was people chained up, and that was never the reality. It's always been a pretty free movement of victims, and they're not, and that was just because public perception was created by comments and posts like that, or news outlets doing stories. It's kind of crazy how fast that changes what people are thinking of is when they think of sex trafficking.
It does happen. I was chained up, but I would say 3 times in 10 years, and it wasn't for very long. Because what's going to happen when you're chained up? You're not out there working. You're not out there making money. But I would also add to that 2 other things that I see as big problem areas right now. One is pornography. And because of COVID, we know that pornography is a direct link to men purchasing or people purchasing sex. And the level of the content of the pornography is so sick. And again, with some of the media, what the media is presenting with these games and like Grand Theft Auto, and even they just came out with a new one. Some of the activities that promote killing women that are in the life to get extra points so that you can play the game longer, things like that. But just Pornhub in general, I think it's a sick venue. And I am an advocate of taking that down and having that as an opt-in, just like back 20 years ago, 10 years ago in hotel rooms. We used to go to hotel rooms and there would be porn right there. Well, now you have to have it opt-in. If you want it, you have to call someplace. I don't know, but the last few hotels I've been at, it's not on there that I could see. The other thing is that there is a movement across the country where people are talking about sex workers and that it's okay, and that this is violence. It's not violence against women. It's not an extension of slavery, that this is a free will thing, and that people should be able to, that it's a viable career path. It's not a career at all. The 1K plan. There's no OSHA. There are no rules to protect the individual. It's very much violence against women and girls. It is gender-based violence. You will find men and transgendered and LGBTQ, et cetera, but primarily it's violence against women. And that mind thought is scary. It's really scary. And I don't know about y'all, but I've got girls. I've got 2 girls, and neither one of them would I want them to go into that oppression willingly. And I think that's a message we have to take a look at. What are we telling our kids, and how is this being framed throughout our communities right now? And it has no place in my life or my community, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, out of the hundreds of victims that I've talked to over the years, I could probably point at one that might have voluntarily got into this, like as a survival type thing. The rest of them, there was no volunteering. It was all manipulation that turned them into this, not the problem, but the continued abuse, that cycle of repeated abuse. So I 100% agree. It's not violent free or voluntary business that people are in.
I think you made
God,
one
I
important
appreciate you
comment
saying
there
that.
too, Ryan. Like the person that you mentioned that was potentially in there, quote unquote, voluntarily did it for survival.
Yeah.
And so it's not, when I've talked to people too, like, well, if you didn't have to do this for survival, would you be doing it? And I've never once heard a yes. And
Yeah.
so if it's not for survival and if it's not being pushed in, from what I've experienced, and potentially if you guys have experienced something different, it just wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Well, SWAP's in town, and they're the group, George Soros's group. They're in town and they're loud and proud. And there's some of the folks that are trying to defund the Minneapolis Police Department and putting their agenda on the table. So I guess I've got some big problems with them, real big problems.
Well, I kind of want to switch over to a few of the questions that our audience members have, just so that we have a chance to kind of incorporate them. It kind of piggybacks a little bit off of what you guys are saying here. I'll kind of start with Terri too. You had mentioned, predominantly violence against women, but one question we had, talking about heterosexual sex trafficking, what about homosexual sex trafficking, dealing with the LGBTQ plus community? Is there a high rate of that too, or what does that look like?
Real high rate, and real high rate of violence. Real high rate of violence. We've had many transgendered folks come through Breaking Free. We don't have support groups for that though. So I send those to my friend Lorena Pinto over at Pride and Drea Family Partnership for some of the support groups. But yeah, we see an awful lot of it on the street as well. We do street outreach almost every day. And we see a lot of violence with the LGBT community on the streets. But yeah, no, and it's usually very, very violent. I don't know, what's your experience, Imran?
I mean, I just think that it's a lot more prolific than all of us know about, just because of the nature of, LGBTQ, some of the people, aren't out. And then that creates a whole different dynamic. And so there is, I think, online exploitation in LGBTQ is probably higher than any other part of the population.
And it's the hardest to detect too, because just the platforms that they use to sell that is hard to infiltrate, and it's hard to set up a date, I guess.
And then investigate, because
Agreed.
It's all done, on companies that are offshore. That's where the communication starts. And then the communication, there's a meetup. So it is extremely difficult. Like Ryan said, we've tried to do numerous of these sorts of operations, and, we've had a few cases, but there's definitely a lot more.
And I think
go ahead,
what's
Terri.
needed, Ashley, are more support groups for the LGBT community and housing programs. I can't get folks that don't identify. Well, if you're not a woman, I can't have you be at my emergency shelter. Now, even if you identify as a woman but are a man, I just can't do that. It wouldn't be safe for everybody there. So to have more housing dedicated for that community, and more resources, I think, because I agree 100% with Imran and Ryan. It is probably the number one targeted group for that kind of violence and abuse.
And in the 2019 Minnesota Student Health Survey, they did a survey for middle school and high school students talking about, have you ever traded sex for something of value? And they have a whole kind of packet of information too. I'd highly recommend people go and check that out. We'll have hopefully a link added to our website soon about that too, but that also touches base on, individuals who identify as cisgender, who identify as the gender they were born with, versus transgender, and what that breakdown looks like within those demographics too. So for community members, I'd recommend checking out the 2019 Minnesota Student Health Survey for that information as well. Another question too that came up for this particular season with COVID is how has trafficking been impacted by COVID? Has it increased, decreased? Are you seeing it more solely online or on the streets, or how has that potentially changed if it has changed?
As far as it's the same volume, I'm guessing. It is our ability to investigate it has been kind of hindered because obviously we're trying to follow the guidelines that are set forth, and we don't want to be bringing people out to expose operating John stings and doing stuff like that. So our ability to investigate and enforce this stuff has been harder, but I think the volume's the same, if not more.
And then definitely that exploitation. I mean, again, sometimes they go hand in hand with trafficking. That's definitely, has been on the rise because we have more and more kids that are at home that are distance learning and then have more time with their tablet, their iPhone. And so we're seeing a lot of, like sextortion cases where they're involving like exchanging pictures back and forth, but the person then extorts them for the money, and other exploitation that we've seen. That definitely, no question, has significantly increased.
Yeah, I feel
Same
as
with
though
pornography.
Go ahead, Terri.
No, you go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say that I feel like the school counselors are going to be busy once we're back full time in school, and the reports will start trickling in just because when you don't leave your house, if it's an internal thing where it's just going to kind of come out once they get able to leave the house and talk to someone that they trust and report that type of stuff.
So then another question popped up is where should parents start to prevent their kids from being involved in exploitation, especially if, Imran, you had talked about, technology, things like that. Are there certain apps? Are there certain, make your kids show your phone every day? Like, what would you recommend for parents? Where can they start with trying to
talk about it?
Talk about
it.
I was going to say landline, but
I mean, what I always tell people is that, you can chip your kid very early, right behind the ear, and they'll never know. And then you're able, just kidding. That's a joke. But I think just like Terri said, I think talk, communicate, ask. There are so many apps now. I haven't been training and teaching since COVID. So this is kind of the first time at it, talking to people, even though I don't get to see people's faces. And so those apps have changed too. And so there's so many apps that I know parents that used that can monitor where they're going online, how much phone time they have. I know Apple has a lot of that really good stuff. But I think you got to have that open dialogue, and you also have to have trust. I think if, I remember as a kid, if, my parents didn't want me to do something, I wanted to do it. And so you have to balance that line between trust and also not being, like a total doormat to your kids.
And I would say kind of as far as the exploitation we had talked about earlier, most I would say, I don't know, there's a percentage out there, I know I've read it before, but the number of people that have been victimized when they're in youth or molested by a family member, stuff like that, is dealing with that stuff and not just brushing it under the rug so that they don't be victimized the rest of their life repeatedly because of that vulnerability that people can exploit. Just dealing with stuff happens, and you're not going to protect everything, but when it does, is a family dealing with it, getting the right help so that they can get their self-wealth back. I guess I don't know how to pronounce that, but so they can be taken care of and know that activity is not right, and kind of work through the damage that was done so it doesn't just keep happening, is my kind of thing to say.
That's the first time I heard anyone say that, and that is brilliant. You know what? That is absolutely brilliant. So, what we do, like we go into Minnesota Teen Challenge, and no one there wants to say they've been involved in prostitution. I'm thinking, well, y'all are addicts, so I'm saying 90% of you have been abused. You don't have to label it again, but we got to process it. We have to process it. We have to acknowledge, yeah, my boss raped me at 15 years old. It happened. Yeah, it was horrible. You know, I'll talk about my feelings, things like that. But now I'm going to move on. You know, and how did that affect your relationships after that, your behavior? Maybe that's when you picked up cocaine. That's when I picked up cocaine after I got raped and all the Vikings were doing it. I thought, oh my God, if, you know, Carl Eller and Jim Marshall and Chuck Foreman can do it, it must not be that bad. And Eric Clapton's singing about it. So why not? You know, have that conversation with your kiddos. But I love what Ryan said. In fact, we're going to add that to our curriculum, is going to the past and processing what happened when you were a child. And then also, at the risk of being a big giant geek to my kids, I'm going to get to know their friends. I want to meet them. I want to know who they are. And some of them have juvie records. Some of them, some of them are in prison right now, but I want to know who they are, what they did, how they were raised, why did they make that decision, what was going on, how can we change that, how can we work together, what amount of time are you going to spend with them, etc. Have that open dialogue.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Kind of semi-shifting gears, but still staying within the conversation for teens a little bit. We have a question of what are the common types of exploitations happening in local schools?
Imran touched on it. The sextortion is we get a lot of reports of that more and more as
And can you define
technology advances. I don't know, I can describe what it's basically someone communicates basically with a juvenile. It could be through any of these apps that you can communicate, and then they start talking, they find a vulnerability and they exchange a nude photo or a semi-nude photo or an inappropriate photo. And then the person that gets that photo instantly comes back and says, you're going to do this, or I'm going to expose your photo to everybody you know. They're usually done through fake accounts, and it's a mess. Like, they end up sending photos because they're ashamed that they did the first photo and they're afraid it's going to get out, and then it just spirals. But yeah, we get those reports a lot, and that's one of the main things we're seeing. Especially everybody's got so much time on a device now because they're home. There's nothing else to do, so they sit and talk to random people. They have no idea who they are, and just trying to have some normal interaction as humans, and then it turns into this mess for people.
If trafficking is occurring at a school specific to trafficking, it's probably their boyfriend that they're going to school with. That's what we've seen. It's not somebody that's, driving around the school parking lot trying to recruit somebody. It's somebody from right in that school.
If somebody,
and a lover boy, using that lover boy mentality, turning them out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If somebody's in a sextortion situation, like they send one picture or they have sent one picture and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, they're asking me for more. What would you recommend to that student? What do you think that they should do?
We've done in many cases where they report it right away while it's going on, and law enforcement ends up taking over the communication, and we try and set up some type of interaction with the suspect, or else we do back end search warrants and get the IP address and track down the person. The faster you report it, the less damage that's going to be done. Obviously, once you send a photo, you don't know what's going to happen with it, but the faster you report it, the more likely we can get the device it's on before it's sent out or posted online. And then it's kind of, once it's out there, it's out there. So
you got to call law enforcement, like Ryan said, at ASAP on all these cases. When we ended up looking at one case and we have one victim, and I'm just going through some today, talking with the detective about it, we've discovered dozens of other victims. Obviously, there's a lot of shame, and they feel like they're going to get in trouble, and they probably are going to get in trouble because they probably had their cell phone in their room and they shouldn't have. But what's the exploitation that's going to happen, and then that picture being online, that's so much more damage than what happened. So I think right away they got a call.
Very helpful. And then for just general kind of for parents as well, we have another question of how are parents responding when you start talking about exploitation at school? Are most parents in favor of this conversation? Are most people reluctant? What kind of feedback have you been getting about this?
Can you say the first part again? It kind of cut out for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
what
didn't hear that.
response have you been getting from parents regarding like having these conversations at schools?
So, like I said, we did it. It's about 3 years going on now. I haven't had a single negative interaction with a parent. The teachers say the students, they talk to them afterwards. They really like it. It's a dark, deep conversation, but we obviously keep it as PG as possible, but to make it the point stick. One thing, I mean, the biggest reward for me is when you're doing this, the presentations is you figure out how bad it'd be to be a high school teacher. But second thing is when you ask a question like who has received unsolicited messages from people they don't know, and everybody in the class raises their hand, and then you start talking about the percentages of people that are exploited at a young age. By the age of, I think it's 10, I can't remember, I haven't looked at it in a while, but
12.
by the age of 10, and you can just see eyes in the room, and they're all looking at you, and you can see all the victims just popping, and it really hits home with them, and it kind of helps them create a community to take care of each other. If they make us stop doing it, I think it's a bad disservice to the community, because that's the perfect age. They're old enough, they're already talking about it. We're not introducing them to something that they're not aware of. It's just giving them the tools to deal with life, and try and get them to avoid getting sucked into the bad life.
But good luck getting into a school. I don't know if you guys, maybe in Woodbury, you guys have some, well, obviously you have a lot of clout.
Yeah,
But,
so we've got all of Washington County, South Washington County School District, and we've been doing it for 3 years in the health
That's
class during
beautiful.
sex ed. It's great.
Minneapolis, not so much. St. Paul, not so much. I'll tell you where you can get into any Catholic private school though. They want to talk about it. I've done a lot with Cretin, De La Salle, all those, but not the public schools. In fact, when I gave a presentation in Minnetonka 2 years ago, I had to wait till after school. And there was only about half a dozen people that showed up. But that's changing. There was a high school student in Hopkins that made the point in the argument a couple of years ago that we really need to get into the schools and talk about it. But I agree 100% with Ryan. That is where it needs to happen. They're already talking about it. Imran and I have talked a little bit about, we both work with the demand side, circles, and talking to abusers. Why not take that same curriculum into schools and talk to young boys, especially in sports programs or some other things where it's just boys and it's not maybe mixed group, or however you want to do it, in health class, whatever. St. Thomas Academy, bring them into these boys' schools and talk about it. Use that same curriculum that we would use for anyone that purchased sex for preventative measures. And I say bring it into prisons too, even though most of us that are in prison have already, gone through that and understand, but maybe we don't know the background of how some of these things, what the whole narrative is. But I say the more we talk about it, the better we are.
Fantastic. So we have about 2 minutes. So I'm going to start kind of wrapping this up. So first and foremost, thank you so much to each of our panelists for taking time to come and share your expertise. Kind of as you're saying, when we can communicate about this, when we can start having these open discussions, that's when we can start listening, learning. And when we start learning, we start growing. And that's how we start making positive change in our community. So thank you all so much for taking time to help us learn a little bit more about what's going on in our community and what we can do as first steps. I know for C.A.S.T, we promote Power Over Predators. There's also 2 other fantastic sexual exploitation prevention curriculums in the state of Minnesota, Act United's Youth Aware, and Love 146, Not a Number, 2 other phenomenal programs. For our audience members, our participants, if any of you know of anyone who is interested in having their a curriculum like that brought to their schools, feel free to send us an email at info@castmn.org. We'd love to help get that curriculum to you. Or if you just have a group of community members who want to learn more about this topic, invite them to our community awareness nights and invite them. We can host Power Over Predator events for those community groups as well. So Yeah, so we're really excited that you all are taking that first step with us. As we go throughout the year, our community awareness nights are going to be focusing even more in depth on the solution side. What practical steps can we be taking towards creating a community where exploitation cannot thrive? That's what we're going to be focusing on through the year. We do that with partnerships of other anti-trafficking organizations, and we're going to be doing that through more education and awareness. So as we close out, I just want to again say thank you. We'll send a follow-up email tomorrow. If you have questions, email us at info@castmn.org or check out our website. And we have information that clarifies some definitions, that talk about risk factors, that have resources, see something, say something, and other things that are going on in our community. So yeah, thank you all again. Hope you have a beautiful evening. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Take care. Thanks.